Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today is the final day of our World Congress, and it's been a wonderful week so far. So we're really thrilled for today's conversation because it is one of our top priorities in this industry, and it touches on some of the most impactful solutions that we can provide to communities as we invest in technology. So today we're talking about how ITS technologies can deliver opportunity to communities. And really this is this digital infrastructure and use of data conversation. Today we're going to do something a little different for the keynote. We're going to have a bit of a fireside chat between a couple of leading private sector companies who are really co-creating a digital ecosystem of the future. So today it's my pleasure to introduce, I'm going to introduce three folks, so just give me one moment. Tom DeMaria, Senior Vice President of Digital Ecosystems at Dell Technologies. He leads a world-class team responsible for accelerating and co-creating the digital ecosystem of the future of IT and OT with cross-industry partners. Prior to joining Dell, he was a global technology leader of next-generation 5G connected car services and partner ecosystem expansion at General Motors, including setting the future roadmap for 5G edge computing. We also have with us today from Intel, Brad Hazinski, Vice President in the Sales, Marketing, and Communications Group, and the General Manager of Next Global Sales and Solutions Organization at Intel. He brings leadership from many of Intel's data-centric businesses, including IoT devices, enterprise networking, 5G mobile communications, edge computing, storage, enterprise computing, and cloud computing. And moderating today's fireside chat is Samir Sharma, Global General Manager, New IoT Markets at Intel. We've talked a lot this week and in general about how we can use data to really better serve our communities, to create safer, more sustainable mobility, distribute services more equitably, and today we're going to have a really interesting conversation about how that data can be used. So please join me in welcoming Tom, Brad, and Samir to the stage.
A very good morning, folks. What an amazing event this has been. Over the last 4 days, we have heard so much about digital twins, system of systems, infrastructure, its evolution, and so on. Before we get to the actual conversation, I want to set this up with a few sobering facts about the reality of our infrastructure today. If you look at our aging infrastructure, and this is just a US view, the impact of this aging infrastructure shows up in everything, from the potential GDP shortfall, to the time we are wasting sitting in traffic, to the impact on our imports, to how the freight industry and our airports are operating well below our potential. But most of all, you see a statistic around the number of deaths that happened in 2021. We are talking about Vision Zero, where we'll be able to reduce these deaths down to zero. However, and unfortunately, we are going in the opposite direction. Now, people say sticking with status quo is the same as indecision, and I would say that is not correct. Sticking with status quo is a conscious decision we make. And in this case, if we don't change anything, we are making the conscious decision to live with all of these issues, to live with this impact, to prevent things from getting better. So hopefully, by the end of this conversation today, we'll be looking at these sobering facts with a bit more hope. With that as a spirit, I'm going to start with the first conversation, and Brad, this is for you. As we look at this aging infrastructure, we've been talking about new infrastructure. We've talked about digital infrastructure. Please tell us, what does it mean for you, your team, and your customers?
Yeah, so thank you, Samir, and welcome everybody. You know, when we talk about infrastructure at Intel, one of the first things we recognized is, especially in the public sector space, in transportation and much of the infrastructure of the United States, It's not always well known the level of depth that Intel technologies have driven into the infrastructure space. The amount of processing capabilities, and we talk a lot about, Pat Gelsinger, our CEO, talks about the fusion of physical and digital architectures. So there are four main superpowers with regards to how we believe the world is enveloping around us. That first, superpower is ubiquitous compute. Every aspect of our daily lives is in some way connected to devices in which we interact with that have really become the center of how we interact with each other. And that was clearly brought to front and center during the COVID-19 pandemic. The second is pervasive connectivity, which ties into that ubiquitous compute, which is all the devices being connected with each other, and the digital infrastructure and 5G connectivity and Wi-Fi and all the technologies that have been deployed over many years and how we connect. We also talk about cloud to edge infrastructure and the need for services and capabilities on how to drive workloads from the edge to the cloud, and things like in between, such as security and capabilities. And you need that ubiquitous security experience, right? But we're seeing more and more data being generated, lots of data being generated, really at the edge, closest to where the data resides. And that really requires the ability to compute and store and analyze and use AI in order to process, analyze, store that data, and take action upon that data closer to where it, like I said, at the edge. At the same time, the cloud service providers and working with cloud infrastructure is how do you manage that data flow between the public cloud, the service providers such as our 5G network service providers. And this is really, really critical. So these superpowers are important. And this digital infrastructure, where it becomes really critical is when you look in environments, especially outside of IT data centers, what we would call an operational technology environment, to put boxes into the ground, to put technology in is cumbersome. And many of products that have been in the market for several years have been what we call fixed function devices. They do a very specific thing. The challenge is, how do you service those devices? Are they upgradable? So when we talk about the fusion of digital architecture with physical architecture, we're talking about how software-defined capabilities are coming to almost every compute point in this entire continuum of computing. This allows the ability, so when you invest in a transportation infrastructure or you do advancements to highway or cameras and digital security, that you're deploying new technology, but in the future you're upgrading out-of-band manageability via software, BIOS updates, firmware updates, capabilities through consoles and how to get to that. So you're not having to constantly send, say, workers out to go into the box physically like you had in the many years in the old telco networks. So this digitization is so critical. And then also, I think what the pandemic exposed was when we arrived to where we are today, one of the things that's very public has been the supply chain challenge we have seen emerge globally. Part of that supply chain challenge was when the pandemic started and we shut down manufacturing lines and we shut down retail stores and we had to move into a social distancing lockdown situation. It became very apparent now what that caused and what the implications of such policies which were required for safety at the time. And what that means is now, whether it's you're looking at the world through a lens of transportation in cities, or you're looking at manufacturing, you're looking at education, you're looking at all these vertical industries, retail, hospitals. Digital technologies are going to be the new change to create outcomes, to have more automation. If you automate more of your factory floor through the fusion of digital and physical technologies, then when disruptions come, you have less disruption to the actual operations of that particular environment, regardless if it's of a hospital or it's a state and local education school system, or it's a manufacturing floor. And that's really what we're talking about as we see technology, digital transformation, and the fusion of digital and physical really changing the world.
Love it, Brad. So what I heard was it's not just about cement and steel. You got to think about the bytes and transistors as well.
Correct.
And we have hope because we've seen this digital transformation happen successfully in other industries.
Yes.
So there's no reason we can't do this with the transportation infrastructure.
That's correct.
Which should give us hope. Great, great. So building up on that message of hope, one of the things we've been hearing about is the government investment in infrastructure. We've heard about Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which is this $1.2 trillion investment, about half of that in transportation infrastructure. But we are not alone in the US in focusing on infrastructure. In India, we have heard about $1.3 trillion of spending towards infrastructure. They call it Gati Shakti, which means the power of speed. It's a play on words. We have seen Common European Fund, $900 billion in Europe. And of course, we have all heard stories about how PRC has built out infrastructure and used it to uplift the GDP, uplift the lifestyle, the standard of living for the entire population. So Tom, when I look at these trends, and we look at what are the implications and how we should think about it, building up on what Brad shared, please share your thoughts on how does Dell see this, how does your ecosystem see this?
Yeah, so well, first of all, it's great to be here. It's a pretty exciting time. This is really a once-in-a-generation type of transformation that's happening across a pretty important segment. In fact, I'd like to just share a little bit of facts that probably some in the audience have thought about before. But so think about this. So there are 10,000 vehicles annually collectively drive the distance from the Earth to the sun every year. There's approximately 1.4 to 1.5 billion vehicles globally. When you actually add that travel distance up from a resource standpoint, we are effectively traveling around 2 light years every year. So effectively in 2 years, vehicles moving on the surface of the planet actually journey to the nearest star. That is a lot of transportation. In fact, I don't know if there's really anything else that rivals that on the planet. In fact, if you switch over to walking, there's roughly 8 billion people on the planet. If you subtract maybe 1 billion are young children, so bring it down to 7 billion people. The average steps that a human takes is 3,000 to 4,000 steps. So you do the math, that's roughly over a mile. That every human walks every day. That's 7 billion miles traveled daily. That's 70 trips to the sun that we're actually doing walking on the planet. So why do I mention that? So if you think about that plus, let's say, the 40 million miles of roadways that just the vehicles are traveling on, that is a colossal infrastructure. It's to just think of it as infrastructure actually is really downplaying it. There really is nothing humankind does that is of this scale. So now if we start to think about that from the physical infrastructure standpoint and what Brad was talking about, if we can apply software-defined technologies, bring more digitization in it, be more efficient with it, interweave it better and create better and more efficient digital journeys, and then use that 40 million miles of asset more efficiently, just 1%, it's huge what the global impact is on the planet. And that's only going to happen by really taking a fresh look at how we converge both the physical and the digital domain, and the technologies that Brad was really talking about. We're kind of at an apex moment where finally there's enough technology that can be taken to the edge, that can be really cost effectively and at scale employed within the infrastructure, that we're really at a generational apex moment where we actually have the technology to really look at kind of a new green slate of how to do this. Now thinking about generational, I want to go back in history a little bit because the history tells us a little bit about what the future opportunity for us and the future of ITS really can be for us. So in my hometown in Detroit, in 1909, and everyone in this group will appreciate this, the first concrete paved road was done in the United States. And that street is called Woodward Avenue, and it was done at the height and the explosion of the automotive industry. And if you think about it, here we are now, over 100 years later, getting to kind of reimagine what a digital infrastructure of roadways and other forms of transportation can be. The other historical shift that was kind of quantum shift in transportation infrastructure is roughly 100 years ago, almost to the year, is when air traffic control was really seriously invested in within the US. Up until that point, a lot of air traffic control is very municipal, very localized, and really it went to a federal air traffic control system in the 20s. The reason I mention that now, coming to the future, is there's a lot of discussion around next generation mobility platforms, autonomous vehicles. There are vehicles out there already that have autopilot capability. We have adaptive cruise systems, level 2, level 3 ADAS functionality. There are robotaxis right now driving around globally that are starting to be driverless robotaxi capabilities. And there's a lot of excitement about that. But if you think about it today, where we're at with air traffic control, one of the most advanced, sophisticated autonomous machines has really been pioneered by aviation. If you look at the capability of a commercial wide-body jet, it has some of the most advanced autopilot capabilities. However, we all know that if the air traffic control system is down, the planes aren't flying, because there's a very important role that the ground infrastructure has in allowing the scalability and performance of aviation to actually be safe and manageable at that scale. The opportunity within the next new infrastructure is to reimagine infrastructure, which really transitions to mobility platforms that actually have a very big role to play in helping these other advanced technologies like autonomous vehicles to really at scale collaborate and share the road and do that in a very controlled way. So very much it's like introducing the concept of ground traffic control, where the infrastructure and the intelligent infrastructure is actually helping the systems on the roads actually perform effectively and much more efficiently.
Wow. Tom, I must say, I'm a numbers guy, and my head is still reeling with all the examples you gave in terms of the scope and how even a small amount of improvement can have such a massive positive impact in how people move, how goods move, in general, the quality of life in our cities. Now, I know your team works with federal officials, federal agencies, transit agencies, and they come to you with issues, customer pain points. I have been coming to this event for close to 5 years now, going all the way back to Copenhagen. I have never heard so many public policy officials talk about digital twins, system of systems, the need for connectivity, data and insights. So in some ways, it feels like we have gone from sort of pushing the rope to having a bit of a pull for what the technology ecosystem does. As you're interacting with all these officials, the decision makers, the policy makers, what are you hearing from them? And maybe share some examples of how Dell has helped and Intel has helped them as well.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, it's definitely we have changed from kind of trying to really understand the scope and the opportunity, especially in the digital domain. Everybody's kind of getting it now. So now everybody's kind of shifting towards, okay, how do we make it real? And I will tell you, I'll just focus in on one, because there's a lot of aspects of that. But time and time again, top of chart is resiliency. Really kind of in 3 areas. Cyber resiliency, because as you open up, as you go more digital, especially as we start to interlock across different transit authorities, different technologies, and even reach into more of the consumer segment of trying to bring applications and services to the effectively the transit customers, there's a higher visibility and exposure to cybersecurity threats. So cyber resiliency is definitely one of them that is really top of mind. And it really starts to become, now we're dealing with how do you provide security in almost a borderless environment where you don't, as an ecosystem, no one transit authority, no one technology is isolated by itself. It's all going to be interlocked as this mobility platform folds out within the infrastructure. The second one that we can't forget, and sometimes it's not talked about as much, is safety resiliency. These are critical infrastructures that very much have a safety element to that. And so it's not just about having the technology out there, but we've still got to meet the DOT expectations around safety assurance and being able to prove the safety and being able to have the fault tolerance in the systems to literally know that the availability of these systems is always going to be there and that the systems are always going to be safe as they scale out. And then thirdly, and importantly, is what's called sustainability resiliency. And that is, and I'll share a story with you in a previous career experience. I was with a technology company that was deploying software on the top of industrial lighting. And we were deploying all these new lights out to one of the big cities in California. And there was a fatal flaw in the software that went undetected, that when we tried to push a software update to update all the lamps in the city, the over-the-air software accidentally locked out the ability to do any future updates over the air. And so the city actually had to go out in cherry pickers and manually get up and physically reflash each one of those lights. And that was very, very expensive and not sustainable as a business model for cities to have to invest that kind of manual labor to just do over-the-air updates. So sustainability gets into the economics, the ability to have lights out operation within the infrastructure, and to know that you can actually manage it and update it remotely without a high touch and high economic cost of that. So those are really kind of been the three aspects that are really important. And both Dell and Intel have been working at the federal, state, and city level on these types of what we call mission critical infrastructure digital systems. In fact, we are working, Dell has been working with Houston Metro on their Metro Next project, which is a whole modernization of their digital infrastructure, as really kind of, they have a real growth opportunity and challenge that they're facing of growing from 7 to 10 million people as their population. So a lot of opportunities there.
Great. Brad, any examples you care to share?
Well, I think when I look at this slide here that we're showing behind us, the most important thing is, as you're merging public sector policy and infrastructure and technology, we realize that, there's not a lot of, technology chief digital officers in every state, local, and federal government entity. And so when it comes to infrastructure and it comes to changing the world for the better, it's important to understand outcomes, right? So when we talk even to the public and get the general public to understand how we can change the world for the better, there's been a constant conversation around green energy, the ESG governance coming down for companies to be contributing to sustainability and sustainable outcomes. And so when we talk about technology, we have to talk about framing it up in the case of an outcome. So when you think about what you see, the 4 vectors here, and earlier I mentioned pervasive connectivity, ubiquitous compute, cloud and edge, and also AI as those superpowers that are underlying this new infrastructure build out. When you think about safety, a perfect example is there were 38,000 traffic fatalities in 2020, which was the highest yearly total since 2007. And this combining of physical infrastructure upgrade with technologies that can actually reduce and create more safety on the roads becomes critical. And you ask yourself, how can, during a pandemic, when you would think once the lockdowns came in, there was less folks driving on the road, so how could you have that many more fatalities? What did the stress levels, or were people driving faster on the roads because there was less traffic congestion? So the outcome is really arriving towards that vision zero. From a climate capability, between 2000 and 2014, the use of 511 intelligent transportation systems across the US directly led to a significant decrease in traffic congestion, which saved over 10 billion pounds of CO2 emissions. And economic growth, infrastructure investments have shown that for every $1 you spend in infrastructure build out can lead to $3 of increased GDP. So it has a great impact to the economy as we want to continue to grow the economy at scale. And then lastly, when we think about equity, access to transportation is the single strongest factor in rising out of poverty And for every dollar we invest, there's $5 in economic return for the community that can be realized. So when we think about what we want to do and how we want to transform, when we think about the infrastructure bill and the opportunity that we all have in front of us, these outcomes are truly changing the world for the better. And that's, to me, why Intel and Dell are so passionate to work together in this partnership to help realize this vision.
Wow. In the time of diminishing stock returns, if you get a 3x or a 5x return on investment, it's a no-brainer. And I think that's been sort of the theme of the conversation here at the conference the past 3 days. How do we go quickly from talking about, admiring the problem, to doing something about it and solving it? So that brings me sort of maybe to a wrap-up question, right? The audience here in the room, on the web, is listening to this, and they may have started with, hey, why are Intel and Dell at a transportation conference? And you just made the link between the data, the insights, the compute, the connectivity, but also our desire to have a positive impact. I mean, these are two companies that are engineering-driven, and what engineers love to do is solve problems. That's what we're here for. So now my question both to you, Tom, and to Brad is, if somebody wants to collaborate, be part of this ecosystem approach, how should they work with us? How should they reach out? How can we help them?
Sure.
Maybe start with Tom.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, it's a really interesting aspect because there's a lot of discussion up here around technology and actually through the whole event for the whole week. But it's actually, the real innovation is the innovation of how we as organizations find new ways to actually collaborate. This is, ambitious. There's a lot of opportunity here, and it's kind of like, well, where do you start? What's the minimal viable path to incrementally get there? And the bigger innovation beyond the technology is actually an ecosystem innovation. And in fact, I'm proud to lead a new function within Dell that's called digital ecosystems, where Dell's leaning forward and realizing it's kind of the next wave of computing. No one company, no two companies is enough to really kind of take this on. And we've really got to figure out how we kind of organize this, work as a community. So our invitation from a Dell perspective is we need to really, at both the technology company level, we have got to come together. This is the era of co-creation that we're entering. And we as technology companies realize that we've got to lift ourselves up and get more involved, higher up into the value chain and closer with the customers, closer with the transit authorities, closer with the ecosystem of this capability to really come together and pull this off. And this is really both looking at how we kind of adjacent to each other collaborate, but also how do we go out into the community and structure this and form this, both from a standards standpoint, from a communities of interest standpoint. That's actually the bigger innovation here. I think a lot of us in the audience, a lot of us up here is that the technology is getting so complex, it's actually managing the complexity and managing the organizational complexities of how you actually divide it up, how you collaborate together. That's really kind of the innovation that's going to really propel success forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And from an Intel perspective, first of all, we're grateful for the long withstanding history between Intel and Dell, and the technology that we have driven into the industry, starting with the PC, and as it's evolved into data center technologies, world-class data center technologies, and moving out to this edge across these 4 superpowers. But to do this kind of infrastructure build-out requires a robust ecosystem. So the first thing anyone could do is reach out to Tom or myself or anybody you see at our respective booths to begin the conversation. But there is an ecosystem of ISVs or independent software vendors. You have systems integrators. You have original equipment manufacturers. You have silicon providers such as Intel. We have cloud service providers. We have the network service providers such as the AT&Ts and the Verizons. This huge ecosystem really requires everyone working together to deploy these kinds of solutions where each one is playing a unique part in the value exchange. At Intel, we have what's called the Intel Partner Alliance, where we bring all of our partner types together and we create a robust value exchange That includes how to partner and do partner matchmaking with various other partner types. We have a partner university where you can learn about these technologies and you can learn about the outcomes that can be created through a plethora of combination of digital infusion with physical infrastructure. And we have communities that get very specific on focusing on certain verticals, whether it's health and life sciences, or in this case, public transportation, smart cities and buildings and education. And so really, it takes that collaboration, it takes that coming together of the ecosystem. Even Intel and Dell, despite our wonderful partnership we've had for over 3 decades, it takes truly a village for all of us to come together in order to deploy at scale.
Fantastic, Brad. So folks, this is what I heard. It's all about the ecosystem. If you're thinking about infrastructure, you got to think about bytes and transistors, the digital technology, as much you're thinking about the physical infrastructure, the cement and steel. This stuff is too important and too impactful for 1 or 2 or even 3 companies to do together. We need to bring the whole ecosystem. And then finally, if you want to see some examples of how at least we are trying to bring this into reality in terms of real solutions, stop by the Intel booth. You'll see examples around public safety, EV charging, fleet management for public transit. You will see examples of how the next generation 5G infrastructure will be combined with things like a smart roadside unit. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot more information. Please reach out to us, connect with us. We're here to help. As I said earlier, engineers love solving problems. And we would love to solve some of these problems on behalf of the society at large. With that, a big thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tom, for joining us on stage. And I do want to thank the ITS World Congress. It's been a wonderful platform, and I hope to see some of you next year in Suzhou, in PRC, at the same stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Vice President, HNTB Corporation, Beth Kegel.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. We're wrapping up the last day of the World Congress. It's hard to believe that it's already been several days, and today we will close with our closing ceremony. We've had great conversations throughout the week as it applies to transformation by transportation that's enabled by digital technology and applications for our digital infrastructure and whatnot. We heard at our opening ceremony, Joost, you had an opportunity to engage with Shaylin, and I loved your analogy of the 8-piece orchestra making beautiful music together, which also lends itself to what was discussed on this panel of private sector partners when they talked about collaboration. So we're going to take that collaboration a little bit farther, and we're going to talk as a part of this related to collaboration between public and private sector. And how do we leverage these technologies additionally from a policy standpoint? So we're going to cover a lot of ground. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, just something interesting and of note, all the discussions that I've had about digital technology, you oftentimes hear the word digitization, you hear the word digitalization, and as someone who is not technical, I thought I would look up the definitions of those, which I thought is interesting. If you look in Webster, which in the US, that's our dictionary, the two definitions are the same. And that's basically transforming something into digital form. However, if you Google it and you look at experts in the space, digitalization is actually a little bit different. It's utilizing these digital elements in a way that you can actually progress your operations and add more value. So we will touch on both of those today, and also how can we unlock all this great opportunity knowing that there are differences of opinion, and how to approach this from a policy standpoint to overcome also some of the challenges. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our austere panel briefly. First, we have Danielle Coachman, who is the Manager of Strategic Partnerships for the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG for short. We have Tilly Chang, our Executive Director of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. Pleased to have Dr. Young Jun Moon, who's with us, Chief Director, Korea Transport Institute, Cody.
Right.
South Korea. He's a director of the Division for Innovative Transportation Technology Convergence. And of course, everybody knows Joost van Tome, CEO, Airtico, and ITS Europe. Thank you all for being here and joining us. So I think what I'd like each of you to do, just to get us started and get a little bit of a baseline, is to share a little bit about your organizations, but also some of the priorities you have in this digital world in terms of what you're working on and where you're going with it. So Danielle, I'd like to start with you.
Awesome. So if you looked at the program, you might have noticed I'm not Hassan Akrada. So just to let everybody know, I'm a last-minute stand-in. His train was an hour and a half delayed today because there was some issue with the crossings. But excited to be here and get to participate on this amazing panel. At SANDAG, we are really trying to address a lot of climate goals. We have state mandates to achieve climate goals. And also, while we're not LA, or San Francisco for that matter, we do have, some congestion, quite a bit of congestion, and it's not getting any better. And then equity is another major goal for our organization. And we live in a world where we can't really expand our transportation network much more. We can't be adding lanes. We know that doesn't work. And so, that's where ITS comes in, is really how do we solve problems that we have? How do we, help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled? How do we improve equitable access to different opportunities within the constraints of our existing transportation system? So we need to operate it better. We need to manage it better. And so we're really kind of in the near term prioritizing smart signals implementation, expanding our managed lane network. So how can, within our existing corridors, manage traffic better and use those to really prioritize shared modes like transit. And so that's what we're looking at in the short term, knowing that technology is rapidly evolving. What our transportation network and what we can leverage technology to do, in the next 10 years is going to be different than today. So, I think the near term, focusing on the near term is really important, and then figuring out how we can leverage partnerships to begin delivering projects faster, infrastructure projects faster.
Thanks, Danielle. Tilly, how about you?
Thanks so much, Beth. And it's a pleasure and honor to be on the panel with this esteemed group. So I serve as the Executive Director of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We're sister agencies here in California. Our agency is the Congestion Management Agency and the sort of the funding coordinating agency for San Francisco. I would say that this is a really sort of complex time, for our city. There's certainly economic challenge. I appreciated the conversation that they just had on resilience, all aspects of it. I think that as we strive for the goals that Danielle mentioned in terms of climate and equity and Vision Zero, economic sustainability and recovery, I think that resilience term is really appropriate. We've just got to keep pressing forward. There's been a lot of experimentation, and that has been somewhat the silver lining. I think our sister agency at SFMTA, which runs Muni, over the weekend restructured the whole Muni network to go from mostly, focused on downtown to really citywide and cross-town. So we're really focused on, again, system performance, reliability, safety, closing equity gaps, both with innovations in technology and deployment. In fact, I was on the exhibit floor this week looking for intersection analytic solutions, near-miss technology, and how to then integrate that into our traffic control systems so that we don't have to rely necessarily on those loop detectors that break down and then you have to dig up the street, right? So this is what this means. It's more cost effective, it's more real time, and it enables us to provide better service to the public. We have two major initiatives in terms of ITS and digitization. One is on the just understanding what's happening in real time, because I can't tell you every week how many of my bosses, who are the Board of Supervisors for San Francisco, say, Tilly, what's going on? Is there congestion? Is there not congestion? What's going on with ridership? Because of all the changing trends around return to work or not, and all the neighborhood activities. So just even understanding what's going on is a huge focus, and we have a great data team led by Joe Castiglione from our agency, just to understand and monitor and manage what is the data flow. How do we really even know what's going on in order to help formulate strategies and solutions? And our other initiative is on Treasure Island, which is right between San Francisco and Oakland on the Bay Bridge. So 8,000 units of housing, 20,000 people in a growing neighborhood. How do we make that work without further congesting the already congested Bay Bridge? So there's a whole suite of technology initiatives that's happening there. It's really exciting. A lot of partnerships. So I'll just note we're all about partnerships, public-private, public-public, and all the other combinations that are out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Young?
Yeah, the digitalization in the transport infrastructure. That's getting to in Korea we call the smart city concept based on digitalization of our infrastructure. That means our conventional and the traditional transport information system, which is ITS, we're trying to so far to see how the people is moving on the some city area or some roadside networks. But at this moment, we say digitalization. The peoples recognize exactly the infrastructure itself. That's it's a two-way communication that gives us a digitalization concept. That means something in case of that's what we call vision zero, which means we're not trying to save the people killed on road. That's because some digitalization, two-way communication, between vehicles and between the pedestrian or whatever the case may be. All the moving subject, they have to change, the information to be changed to each other. That will try to get a good goal to save the people killed on road. Okay. Another vision zero, which means net zero situation. So if you move something, if you drive your car, then you know exactly how much I generate the CO2. Okay. So that's because in case of the city or the other operator ask you to get some sort of level of CO2 at this moment, some two-way communication. It gives you or it gives the people the encourage not to utilize their passenger vehicle every day, but to change the other sustainable mode to be shared. So this is is already possible. That's because I'm in ISO TC 204 working group 17 convener, which is nomadic mobile devices. That's why we have good goal, two goals that digitalization by your mobile phone or your nomadic device network then gives you two goals. One is save the people on road, and the other goal is save the planet. That's our digitalization in transportation. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Great, thank you, Young. Joost?
Good morning to everybody. And Beth, I think it's a good question. First, of course, short introduction on Ertico. We are a bit the counterpart of RTS America and RTS Asia Pacific, a public-private partnership, a true public-private partnership, and we do play music with 8 sectors. I'll give you some examples. We have 129 partners or members, public authorities, member states, countries, provinces, regions, cities, that's one part. And they, of course, are very interested in the data sharing, G2B, so government to business, and the other way around, business to government, but also consumer to government. The second branch is traffic and transport industry. You see a lot of our members here. They're actually focusing not only the physical assets, the physical attributes, but also the digital attributes, the digital twinning. So that's an important sector, very, very big sector as well. The third one is the connectivity industry, mobile network operators, satellite operators, also cloud providers. We just have Microsoft and Google as new member for this year. But they are actually the glue across all these silos. So we try to de-silify all this, de-silification in all this. Other sectors can be so traffic transport users. We should talk about the user perspective as well, because this is about the supply demand. This is supply here in the exhibition. What about the users? Do they need this? What about not being part of this data economy? Well, do you still exist without an ID and without your smartphone? And that's another question we'll have. So with this, all these sectors together, we play music to come with a unified solution. And I think the glue is definitely data. And it's not surprisingly, the European Commission, in my backyard, they came up with a very big Green Deal strategy. We call it Fit for 55, 2055. And they've broken it down in all sectors. Housing, agriculture, obviously, but transport is a big polluter, emitter of emissions, so CO2, but also PM, so particulate matters. And so for air quality, there is a big program on, I would say, new for cars. It's about Euro 5, Euro 6D, and 2035 will be without any combustion engine anymore for vehicles in Europe. So that's one program, the Green Deal, obviously a bit further away for the data. The second has to do with data. It's a large data strategy of the European Commission and the Parliament, where they want to have more data available from private sector and from the private sector, and also to make it interoperable. Because it's nice to say, you speak Korean, I speak Flemish, we don't understand each other and probably do not work in the same frequency in the spectrum. So we need a common metadata set and then a common set of data. And the trick is how to, we can discuss this later on, do we do it on a voluntary basis or do we do it with in a mandated way? And there is a bit of mixture in Europe. So data is a big thing, and sustainable and smart mobility obviously as well. So for you.
Great, so let's delve a little deeper into that one. Because we heard our fireside chat participants talking a lot about collaboration within the private sector and all of the different pieces that are included there, and maybe we can share different pieces of the pie as it relates to that. But let's talk about data sharing and collaboration between public to public as well as public to private, because there are a lot of differences of opinion in terms of how that can be approached. Joost, you actually started that conversation. It was a good segue into my question. You teed it up nicely about the question relative to how should that be accomplished? I mean, should this be a priority? Understanding the concerns relative to data sharing and data governance. Should it be a priority? And can you talk a little bit more even what's happening in Europe with how this is being addressed because of the impacts to interoperability, even mobility as a service, MOS, that I know is a priority in Europe. Please.
Well, actually this week in the European Parliament, they are discussing the review of the ITS directive. So in Europe we have an overriding framework, it's called ITS by coincidence, and there is a directive which means it's a tool, a legal tool for the 27 countries in Europe, the member states, plus UK, who is also associated to the work. Now this is being discussed because they upgrade the data sets, they upgrade the candidates for data sharing. In the past, up to now, it's about road authorities, it's about vehicles. Mostly they have to talk to each other, V2V, V2I, and V2X. Today, in this tool, they are upgrading it for mobility services such as MaaS, or mobility on demand here, but also electric charging data. If you have an electric vehicle and you don't know where the charging station is, or if it's empty or full, or where it is, or is it being blocked by somebody else, yeah, you'd better have these data in advance instead of queuing. So that is a new candidate for mandated data sharing. Another one is governmental data on bridges, tunnels, waterways. So these data getting digitized in terms of machine-readable format, and they will be available in national access points. And so the beauty of Europe, it's 27 different countries, different languages, but we all speak the European language, which is data sharing. And in Ertico, have the pleasure to lead some of these tasks. We've been asked by the Commission to help them with setting up a synchronization of the national data sets. Each country has data from its own infrastructure, they're digitized, data from vehicles, data from service providers, for all kinds of things, and they assemble the raw data and they make intelligence of it. So from a raw data, you aggregate it with a service provider and you make an event of it, a use case that you send back to the driver or to the VMS or to the whatever, to the broadcasting through TPEC, for example. So that project wants to, we call it NAPCORE, N-A-P-C-O-R-E. We do that for the Commission and the Member State to synchronize all these data platforms, because every country has different platforms, and also make sure that there is an interoperability. Because probably here the same, not all data sets are actually the same, which is logic. The devices are not the same. We will not clone all the devices, but we need to speak in a common language. And so travel data, traffic data, static and dynamic data, but also data on charging stations, data on, for example, also closure of bridges, open of bridges, data on multimodal travel information, on mass services. They will all be available very soon now. Real-time traffic information as well, all available free of charge through the national access point in Europe. And that's one of the tasks we have. We have another task is data for road safety. That's another platform that we host within Ertico, where actually we get data, raw data from vehicles. It can be, I'll give you an example, the wheel is spinning, the ESP goes on, so there is a stability control problem, or the wiper goes on and off. Probably that means that it's raining or icy roads or whatever. Now, the fact that you have this raw data set from a vehicle, if you would merge that data with others' data coming from other vehicles and other things like the roads sector, you can actually combine this and 1 + 1 will be 3, meaning you will have an event that you can create. And the event in this case could be slippery roads. Now, the fact that the road is slippery is very useful information for the truck community, for example, the heavy-duty vehicles, or for the truck platooning use cases. And so that system, that we manage this flow between OEMs, service providers, road authorities, and to cycle it back to the vehicle with the HMI or mirroring of the app. So that's another beautiful example of data sharing on how it works in I would say, the e-horizon, that you see, you forecast what will happen. Please.
Yes, that's a lot of progress being made in Europe, and I want to continue on this question a little bit to get a couple of different perspectives. Tilly, I know when you and I spoke, you talked a lot about seamless mobility, and the need to have that. Can you share a little bit, too, from your perspective here in California and from the U.S., what does data sharing mean, the prioritization, and how should we approach it if that's something that we believe that seamless mobility is a necessity here?
No, absolutely. I think everyone can agree how central data is to informing decision-making, essentially. And as we embrace innovation and new technology, how do we maintain the public trust? And I think that's all. It goes to all of that. And I really hats off to Ertico and Europe. I feel like we're still evolving this both at the federal level and at the state and local level. We debate, tussle. We have these conversations, but it's really evolved to a place where we agree how important it is. Now we just have to define even terms. You started this session, Beth, with definition of terms. Just what is open data? What are these standards? Do they exist? Do we need to create them? Yes, we do. And it starts with terms like open mobility, interoperable mobility.org and the Open Mobility Forum. They're working on things like this. And this is groupings of folks that are literally co-creating, what does the standard look like for transit and for bike share and for autonomy. And it really is going to take the labor of everyone, the private sector, the public sector, investing in our teams, from a human resource investment standpoint. It's not just buying the data or the technology, it's the human, I think, capacity that we do need to cultivate together so that we can come together and create these and push those ideas up and out, not only to the decision makers, the policy makers, but to the public. Because when there's so much heat, not enough light, I think data is the way to kind of create that path forward. And it's going to take a concerted investment and effort from all of us on a sustained basis.
So any thoughts as to whether there should be mandates for data sharing?
You know, I think with each new funding source, there's an opportunity, like the IIJA, and the Inflation Reduction Act, or even new revenues that we're on the ballot in November in our city with a new funding source. That's an opportunity to establish kind of new rules and establish, okay, we already require evaluation, right? But what does this mean in terms of interoperability and seamlessness, as you say? How do we even measure that? And for whom, right? It's not just in aggregate. Of course, anonymized aggregate data is where we begin. But we have to try and get that characterization of who's being served and who's being left out to have an equitable and inclusive sort of process. And it's not just residents, it's small businesses who are busy running their businesses, and do we reach out to them in terms of what does a on-demand delivery system look like for you? Are you even digitized in order to, we talked about this at the AV forum the other day here at this conference, can they even engage in the conversation? How do we help them engage to be part of the solutions, whether it's cargo bikes or autonomous delivery services? So I think that is where, at the local government level, we can help add value and to bring in the stakeholders and the community members to make it as comfortable to engage as possible. And then through that, we chart a path forward. Because if we just start with the plopping down the technology, or somebody drops down some technology without even kind of coordinating, we've seen how that goes. And it's not pretty. So it just sets us all back, because we all want to drive adoption. We all want to drive deployment. But we really do need to bring the public along and to show the benefits as we go forward for everybody.
I just want to say one thing back to the idea of mandate, not mandate, what you presented by tying it to the funding mechanism, a little bit of a kinder, gentler way of approaching it, particularly in the US, because we do have a lot of discussion about that. Some are able to mandate it and make it so. A little bit different here in the US, I would say, especially if we want to try to have this occur throughout the country. Is there anybody else that would like to chime in on the data sharing aspect?
I'll chime in, sure.
Jump in the pool.
So, I was thinking back about, we've always used data to inform our planning, and how data has changed how we, I'm a planner, how we plan. And so traditionally, we would do every 10 years a travel behavior survey to collect our own data, and then that would, inform our computer model, that we then use to do all of our planning, basically, and figure out that, projects were going to help us achieve our goals. And then suddenly, travel behavior started changing a lot faster. We did our last every 10-year travel behavior survey in 2016. And then, we realized pretty quickly we had the mass adoption of transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. We had scooters, bikes, all sorts of forms of new mobility, and people's travel behaviors were changing very rapidly. So actually, SFCTA was one of the partners. We did a statewide effort to do an interim data collection. And that was an interim one. We didn't have the biggest sample, and we got $1 million grant and spent a lot of staff time from 4 different agencies to get that data collected. And that was in the fall, I think, of 2019.
Yep.
We didn't even have the data cleaned and processed by the the pandemic hit, and now we have a whole new set. So it was basically a waste of time.
No.
I hate to say that.
I wouldn't say it's a waste.
But it felt like it, in some ways. It was so disappointing.
We just need to do it again.
Yeah, we need to do it again. So we are actually doing our big travel behavior survey now.
Yep.
But what's changed really is, how quickly we can access data, how efficiently we can access data, and how valuable data is, because we have the ability to now collect it in real time with new technology. And so we need to recognize, when we look at these different partnerships and working with the public sector partners and private sector partners, that there's different value to the data for each of those agencies, both in, how much we value it and what we want to use it for. And we really need to recognize that. And, as we, work on different projects, there needs to be concessions made. And I think data is the #1 priority, honestly, in a lot of these types of, agreements. And it's a negotiation. So sometimes you have to give something else up that you want to really have access to the data that you need. And who owns the data and who has access to the data is, just that needs to be that #1 concern.
Yeah. Young, sure.
Yes, I'm going to give you some typical example of data sharing partnership between our government to the private sectors. So as you know, in Korea, last 20 years, government spent more than $2 billion to install ITS systems in the national authority road, which is the expressway, and as well as national road, which is almost the 20,000 kilometers. We have another 100,000 kilometer local road and urban roads. Government trying to take this kind of role is not the government, but they are trying to build up to the local government or whatever the case may be. But local government has the limited fund, not covering all these kind of IT systems to be installed. That's the reason why recently, maybe 10 years before, the mobile the companies, as you know, the KT and SK Telecom, as well as our LGU Plus, they're trying to make their own these mobile phones to provide car navigations. Okay, so at this moment we have in Korea more than 90% of the drivers, they utilize their mobile phone as a car navigator. Not in the onboard unit car navigator. It's not going to be used so far, which means they collect the data every day. They have the huge data from the mobile phone users. Then that's the reason why they have the big data every day they collect. But the national government, they have the national road and expressway data. It's collected by high-pass electric toll collection. In the weekdays, average 3 million units. They collect the data, and weekend they have the average 4 million units data, which means they have the huge data. It's very accurate and very reliable data too. Okay, so the reason why the government asked or the private sector asked together, could we share the data between? Okay, so let's make the MOU. They made it a few years before. But this government data, accurate data, goes to the private sector. They utilize their navigation information based on the data from the government. And also, the private sector give all the data they collected in a mobile phone to the government. Government trying to analyze it, that what is the problem situation in some of the safety problems or the other congestion problem or the other case of the sustainable problems on road, which they did not develop yet. Okay, this is some combination was great, and at this moment, these two kind of the sharing data utilizing another sector of mobility servers. Okay, so this is our typical example of the government and private sector data sharing.
I think Dr. Moon is right. There's a lot of discussion that we had in the vehicle business. Yeah? Access to vehicle data, I think there's also a discussion here in the US. Will the OEMs, will they allow to share data from vehicles, either onboard or offboard? And what about bidirectional communication? What about cybersecurity concerns, etc.? Right. We have the same discussion in Europe. And there is now a data act that actually obliges all providers of terminal equipment, including vehicles, to be able to be subject to mandates for specific purposes. Now, the beauty of the system, because I've been part in an expert group of the Commission for that, the Commission does not, the European legislation does not say you have to disclose this and this and this data. They say no. If you have data that are relevant for a given use case, it's up to you to select them, but you're obliged to share them. Yeah? Right. So the vehicle business can then say, well, maybe the information on my traction control or on the steering wheel thing or the activation of other things that might be relevant, or a smartphone operator as well. So that is the beauty of the system. It's a semi-mandate. There's only one mandate today for vehicle, there are two actually, for vehicle data. It's eCall. So eCall is an automated system that all vehicles have when there is an accident, a crash, that there is a minimum data set being sent from the vehicle to the 112, to the emergency services, so that I can know where is the vehicle, how many airbags went off and on, and so what's the rescue plan. Right. That's a mandate in Europe. It's called eCall, and it works on cellular technology. The second mandate is on safety-related traffic information. So all safety-related, like I mentioned the example of slippery roads, this has to come from vehicles, but also from roads, from the road sector. And indeed, the discussion is, we haven't discussed about the elephant in the room. It's in Europe we call it GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation, which you know here. It's extremely protective for consumers. Okay, there is good and bad news, but it's sometimes so restrictive for companies that you need consent from the data subject to share the data. Consent or contract or legitimate interest, these things. And that's why some legislations, they overrule it and they put it as a mandate in the law, so that the consumer cannot say no or yes, it's mandated.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned consumers.
Yeah.
Because I was actually going to pivot to talk more about trust, or public trust, exactly, as it pertains to this. You know, we know in the US that when Tesla was first launching, and even still today, every time there was an accident, even though millions and millions of miles have been traveled, that's big news here. And it creates fear. So now we're talking about data, right? Data security, maybe my personal data that goes beyond, you know, the companies sharing data with the public sector. So Tilly, could you share with us kind of your perspective on that as it comes to public trust and how to approach
especially
that?
as it relates to safety and crashes. You know, we have been supporting deployment of, say, autonomy, you know, in California, and we're home base, hometown for some of the first commercial autonomous passenger services, right? And so it's happening out there, you know, incidents occur, you know, to varying degrees of seriousness. And what we're hoping is that the regulatory agencies, you know, will help document what has happened and will pursue really good diagnostics or evaluations of, you know, what were the factors. Because if we don't have that at this early stage, we are going to lose the public trust. Already, you know, imagine being the one city test case for autonomy in terms of commercial services, and just not having the feeling that that somebody will follow up, right? And there have been incidents, so we want to promote, you know, standards around what is expected in terms of crash reporting, in terms of what was the emergency vehicle access and the response time to say, remove a vehicle that gets stuck in traffic and is blocking, you know, not just traffic and buses, but emergency vehicles. So what does that response time look like? And we've suggested various metrics. We can continue to debate them. But I do think that the role of regulation, the healthy and needed role of regulation, is to set those standards down in terms of the metrics, the process that is expected. It can't just be voluntary. I think there needs to be some that are absolutely required in order to have real-time sort of accountability and transparency, so that we can better understand and learn from those. Because if we don't, you know, have the objective data, it will be hard to, you know, progress as quickly as we think we would like. So we've had some of those incidents right here in our hometown, in our backyard, which we understand is going to happen. So, but the question is, how do we respond, and how do we address the public's desire to understand and have a fact-based, you know, approach to understanding what happened, and be objective about that, and then, you know, have a good response to what is needed.
Would anyone else like to jump in on that? Public trust related to data?
I think, you know, the experience that comes out of sharing your data is what really is important. You know, obviously, Sandag collects and maintains lots of PII, and, you know, we have a good history, and, you know, as do a lot of other government agencies, of protecting privacy of the data we have. But me personally, I appreciate the experience I get from people having my data, private and public sector. I'm a single mom, don't have a lot of time. I'm really glad that, I get those targeted advertisements. I do my shopping on Instagram. and I don't have to go to the mall because, the algorithm knows exactly what I like, right? And so, I think a lot about in the future, if we have, an option for people to opt into like different levels of data sharing and have a different experience, they're able to benefit from sharing more data. So I don't know, that's far off in the future, but something I like to think about.
And by the way, that just reminded me, I don't know if this is happening with any of you in the audience, but every element of social media, I am constantly getting reminders, even today, that I should be registering for the ITS World Congress. So obviously, somewhere in the cloud, they know that I am a big fan of the World Congress or events like the World Congress and that I should be here. But it doesn't know that I am here. That's the only thing. Joost, were you going to add to that?
Well, we had a long discussion of what is, in Europe, the personal data versus non-personal data. A lot of data that is being shared or being used can be seen as personal data. The fact that you are in a vehicle that you are braking will generate on the ECUs a lot of data sets. Yeah? Now that data is personal because you have activated this way of doing. If it's personal data, you need to have the consent of the data subject. So that means that the consumer or the person needs to know in advance what kind of use of the data will happen, what's the treatment of the data, the processing, who is the processor, what is the finality, yeah? And he has a right to get access to that and even a right to remove the data. He will also have a right to port the data to another system, so the portability, which is huge for the GAFAs, the American GAFAs. It's a huge impact. So that means that there's a lot of data potential, but the consumer, we should demystify all this for him or her. It's a bit like automated driving or the autopilot discussion in the US. Is it ADAS or is it automation, and who is in the loop and who is responsible? And that's really a big thing next to cybersecurity and credential management systems, that the data goes from one, I would say, object to another in a secure way and an authenticated way. And we have in Europe quite a legislation on this, quite strong legislation that is also applicable for our ITS sector. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to keep this moving a little bit because we're getting close to wrapping up. So one more question before I'm going to ask you to do a lightning round here. We've talked a lot about people. I want to talk about freight for just a moment. Brad from the Fireside Chat talked about freight, the freight ecosystem, and what have you. How does this availability of data and the use of data and the transformational aspects of that, how is that something that can benefit our movement of goods, which has really been elevated in visibility? And when I ask this question, I ask it from port to the doorstep or to the curb. That's where the ecosystem lies, within all of the elements in between. So Danielle, how about starting with you first?
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to move a little bit away from the data discussion and move more towards like a couple of really exciting ITS projects that we have going on in San Diego. San Diego has, I think a really kind of interesting environment for goods movement. We have 2 marine terminals. We have a lot of military, which can make things a little more complicated in that area. And then we also have our border to the south with Mexico and one of the busiest land border crossings in the world at San Isidro. And there's a lot of freight moving through that border crossing and also coming into our marine terminals. So with the pandemic, we did see, a lot more demand for, getting stuff delivered to your house. And, we had a lot of supply chain issues and a lot of things were changing. But within, the freight sector, there is some level of regularity, I think more so than, people and their movement patterns. And so it really provides us an opportunity to test new technology in a way and pilot projects. And so, some of the things that we work on right now is, some signal priority for freight moving between our 2 marine terminals and queue jumping projects. And then we're working on opening a new border crossing in Otay Mesa. We actually have 2 border crossings at the south, so this will be a 3rd one, about 15 miles, I think, to the east. And I'm looking around, and Mario's not here today, so I'm not going to get in trouble if I say something wrong. But we've connected it back to San Diego with a toll facility that's going to be dynamically priced. And what that will then do is keep, for the new border crossing, it's going to be, I think, the most technologically advanced border crossing in the world, possibly. But we'll use the dynamic pricing of that toll facility on the American side. We have a revenue sharing agreement with Mexico to keep the wait time at that border to 20 minutes, which is really has a big impact on freight and our economy. The existing border crossing that I talked about at San Ysidro, it's typical 2-hour wait, but can be anywhere up to 6 hours plus. That people and goods are waiting to move across the border. So that's a big economic impact, and also with all the idling, a big air quality concern as well. And so looking at, how we can really use ITS, and then also, of course, data needs to inform, because we're doing, a lot of real-time management of those systems. It's, has a huge impact. It moves the needle a lot on a lot of the things that we care about. But also then, we can learn some lessons in that environment that then we can apply to other types of movement, which is really exciting. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I'm sure other people are going to want to talk about more of the last mile delivery stuff, because there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there as well.
And I don't know how you knew I was going to go to Tilly next, because the curb, and it's funny because you mentioned vocabulary and acronyms, and all I could think about when you said that is that I sat in on the infrastructure workshop on Sunday where we're talking about mobility data standard, and I heard a new acronym, curb data standard.
Oh, next. Yes.
Okay,
So
and so we can't forget. So I have to learn more about that. But we can't forget where these goods begin and where is their destination. So oftentimes now we're seeing more demand for the curb.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that tends to be public infrastructure, right?
Absolutely. And it's the one area that locals do get to manage jurisdictionally, right? So it's not the state, it's not the feds. I mean, every parking space, every inch of curb is kind of contested in San Francisco, famously. So we really have to be smart about how we manage it, and it does begin with better understanding the use of the curb by passenger and freight, and all the color curbs, and all the, now we have shared spaces, where we knock out some parking spaces just for, seating and restaurant areas. So SFMTA is our city partner, and they're the ones who regulate the curb. And we know that there are cities like, Washington, D.C., and all over the U.S. that really are trying to figure out how to digitize the curb so that you don't have to, statically decide, well, this is a white zone, and this is a yellow zone, and these are the 30-minute meters, and these are the 2-hour or 4-hour or no-limit meters. You can't do that bureaucratically. It doesn't make sense. So you've got to have this ability to kind of be flexible and have the ability to manage that in real time. Maybe even the same parking space will be freight in the mornings and in the evenings, but passenger or whatever, and then flip to freight, goods moving in the off-peak, so that you can manage your congestion through your curb. And then how do we then bring the small businesses into it and get them to share in the benefits of managing this curb, because change is hard. People don't like change. But if we can actually generate good turnover and even some revenue, and then beautify the streetscape, put benches and lighting and get more foot traffic and get folks to come from all the different other modes, that's a win-win. So I think that's the promise of it. Again, our sister agency, SFMTA, is leading that initiative. We are interested in, not just promoting because of the pandemic. There's all these goods delivery, but the car light version of that, sure, there's going to be, TNCs and all the vehicles and autonomous or not. What about cargo bikes? And I know that New York has innovated this, and we're certainly very interested, as our downtown, just has a lot more kind of available space. There's fewer commuters coming in. We want them to come back. I think they're having a great time at Dreamforce right now as we speak. But, it's going to change. Downtowns are changing. So how do we change the curb and manage toward our goals?
And it has a big Vision Zero implication as well, right? Because there's so many different modes colliding at the curb, and
they're all competing for that curb space. And we do need autonomous vehicles who test and deploy in San Francisco to pull over to the curb. So I'll just make that one last pitch, which came up. There's something just parking in lane or just stopping in lane to load and unload. So pickup drop-off is a hot topic. We're going to keep debating it and trying to refine the rules and how we do those types of.
Hey, we even have neuro vehicles, right?
Yeah.
That have been certified by NHTSA.
Yes.
That are dropping off pizzas, right?
Oh yeah.
Maybe other things here. So that's another aspect of autonomous mobility
And
for goods.
the cute little bots.
That's right. That's right. Would anyone else like to add to this?
Well, I'm not actually expertise in logistic area, but you remember our IT system is introduced more than 25 years before. The sector is CVO, commercial vehicle operation. The concept is at the time, just-in-time, deliberation, as well as some the real-time the information is that decrease our inventory levels on the warehouse, and some the delivery in real-time situations. But at the time, so far, the CVO concept is not going to be developed. Upgraded, but digital infrastructure at this moment, okay, so mobile networks, 4G LTE and 5G network, it's possible to create our CVO, conventional CVO concept to be more the highest sophisticated the level, the technology to be adopted. That's I'm just saying about it. Yeah.
I'd like to add a final perspective from my lessons learned. We have a project in Europe called Phoenix. We won this project for the European Commission with European funding, millions of funding. It's an important project, where we link the ships, the warehouses, the containers with heavy-duty vehicles, and then the warehouses up to the last mile, up to the curb, actually, up to the final delivery at home or at your business. Now, what we learned this project is not only to test 5G technologies and seamless transit, but digitization, that's the first word you used today, digitization of documents is key in this, meaning the flow of doc. Can you imagine if you have to ship a good from the US to Europe, you have a pre-customs declaration, you have an NHS code, HS code that you have to fill in, there is a pre-alert to the customs authorities. It's a very complex world, and every time it's different documents. Every country has different documents, every region. So we digitize this, at least like the data sets, we try to have one common data set, and this is done with IATA, with ICAO, and United Nations, etc. And that's being done now in this project, successfully delivered by us, where actually there is no document anymore, and all these trucks, and you don't have to sign and wait and so on. And this is great. This is Europe at its best, I would say.
Excellent. I mean, hugely important in the whole supply chain management aspect of freight mobility. I want to mention one more thing. Discussions that are happening in the U.S. is that when you look at self-driving trucks, for example, the use of LiDAR and other sensors, there are also tires available for trucks that have sensors that can provide information on road conditions, particularly in bad weather environments, in addition to other things that are very important as far as wear and tear on the tire. The tire is the only part of the vehicle that touches the road. So if you think about all the data that is being collected or could be collected from those in private industry, Joost, you had talked before about the sharing of data with automotive manufacturers and whatnot, but think about that in a freight environment because of all that data being collected, and how can we have conversations relative to what does the public sector have in the form of data, as you'd stated before, that could be of benefit to those particular carriers and operators. So we're getting close to our time here, so I have one thing left to ask all of you. We're going to do a lightning round, so I'm going to ask you to be brief and make one key point around 30 seconds. We've had a lot that we've talked about here. We've had a lot that we wish we would have talked about here. We just didn't have time. So is there one key item, whether we talked about it or not, that you would like to leave this audience with as they think about what they can do to be a collaborative force as we move forward in this digital transformation that we're having? And I'm going to start with you.
I like that look. Like
I just wanted to
make
see.
sure.
Okay.
So one thing that I just didn't touch on that I would have loved to get to is, about how perception changes after an adoption of something new technology, new service, whatever it is. People are hesitant. Once they try it, they like it, and so we just keep that in mind, is sometimes you just have to kind of pilot things, get them out there, new technologies, ways that we use data, and let people experience it so that the public perception can follow.
Great point. I actually used a scooter for the first time while I was here in LA, and it's great. Now I'm going to do it as much as I can. You're absolutely right on that. Tilly, how about you?
I would love a national or international database of lessons learned. Like whatever the deployment was, let's make sure that the evaluation was not only funded, but actually conducted, and then publish it. And I guess that's what kind of TRB does as far as research, but just a plug for investing in research and evaluation.
And particularly when there have been some trial deployments and things like that, right?
Yeah. It sounds simple, but being on ITS America board, we've been discussing, how can we help promote that? Because all the different agencies have their databases, but how do you put them together?
And there's much to be learned from all around the world, too. Young, how about you?
Yes, this time is very important for us to be focused on not to only for the vehicles, but also we spend our mind, our view, in IT's view, to vulnerable users. Okay, we have to save the people to kill the road, which means if you focused on the only vehicles, you have very heavy VRX functions. But if your view is trying to get the whole vulnerable users, you need very slight V2X function, which means VRU2X. That will make possible to save the people on road. Okay, so let's think about it. To our data, every person, they create a data as the old subject to create data and to get the data and sharing data together, which means exactly what that is. All the units, they can share the data status, they can share the intents, how they walk or through bicycling or cross the street, whatever the case may be. So that's why trying to open the mind to see to cover all the VRU in our ITS area for the data issues. Okay?
Thank you, Young. And Joost, you have the great opportunity, as we are over time, to close us out with your message to the audience.
There's a paradigm shift. We all use vehicles, micromobility, train, tram, bus. Right. But it's not this instrument that will actually be the future. It's about who is dictating you to use what kind of medium. So it's a data business. And in the data business, typically you have databases, data warehouses. And my question would be, how do you tackle asymmetries? Meaning, you have guys that have more data than others. You have guys that monopolize data, that can actually abuse the position to go into new markets. So how do you tackle this asymmetry of data, where there is no level playing field in mass, for example?
Thank you, Joost. Let's give a round of applause to our great panel. And enjoy the rest of the day.
So we have one more feature today. I'm pleased to have a group of students who are looking at the future of transportation in a very unique way. As all of you know, our workforce challenges in the transportation industry increase. We will need thousands of technical workers, operators, and leaders to advance these skills so we can forge the world's electric vehicles and intelligent systems. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Karen Suarez, the director of Uplift San Bernardino, who will share her story and discuss the importance of including the community. She will tell you how she's been able to create this wonderful student program in San Bernardino. Also joining us is Enid Jaffe, who will talk a little bit today about the importance of vehicle electrification and what it can do for a region. And finally, we'll actually hear from the students themselves who have completed projects in the local schools and we'll hear how their interest in new technologies and transportation will be the future of our new world. So please welcome Karen and Enid.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. My name is Karen Suarez. I'm the director of Uplift San Bernardino at the Making Hope Happen Foundation in the city of San Bernardino. I want to thank my colleagues who are part of our EV project, our Uplift San Bernardino network, Enid Jaffe and Elena Farnsworth, who, without her, we would not be here today. We are building a generation of successful adults committed to growing roots in the city of San Bernardino. We do that through neighborhood development, economic opportunities, and our greatest asset, human capital. I'm here to share that we want to support the sector's innovative approaches, especially engaging communities like ours, and more specifically, our youth, to be a part of this movement, to train locally, to partner with educators in K through 12, and work together to ensure pilots and adoption for intelligent transportation and clean technology can happen in cities like ours. Find your community-based assets in your cities, or come visit us in the Inland Empire, and continue to start to include youth and community in decision-making, especially in cases we are the end users. In addition to asking residents and neighbors where infrastructure should be prioritized, our project is going to be training students to do outreach and assess homes for EV infrastructure readiness. We're learning that resilient communities like ours are interested in EV and new technologies and want to charge at home and important places like grocery. We're so glad to be here in support of ITS World Congress, and we want to give a special thank you to ITS America, Laura Chase and her staff for highlighting the accomplishments of our amazing young students. Even trying to get here today required lots of logistics and transportation systems, and we're so excited to learn and grow from all of the innovation that is happening here right now. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Enid.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the last part of the conference, and I'm very happy to be here today. I'm just sorry that our partner, Elena Farnsworth of the Next Education, had a family emergency and couldn't join us, but she's cheering us on from her home in Michigan, and I know she has a lot of friends and colleagues here. So my name's Enid Jaffe, and I've been working on electric vehicles for 3 decades. First at Southern California Edison, then at my own charging installation company, and now as a consultant. As we see in the headlines every day, the future is intelligent transportation powered by electricity. We've been talking a lot about data. I love hearing about all that information, and the electric cars are generating a lot of great information. EVs are now selling at the highest rate ever, and the federal bipartisan bill is investing $7 billion in creating the equivalent of the interstate highway system in EV charging. California, Oregon, and Washington are all ending sales of internal combustion engines in the next 10 to 15 years. This is the next revolution, and we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to impact the quality of life on our planet and do it in a just and equitable way. The EV charging industry is creating thousands of jobs in design, installation, programming, manufacturing, and repairing chargers. However, we need to train young people, like those talented people that are joining us today, to fill those jobs. And we need those young people to come from the communities that are most impacted by air pollution, the communities where kids grow up with higher rates of asthma and higher rates of respiratory infections, which is pretty much everywhere in LA, San Bernardino, and Riverside. Elena and Karen Suarez, myself, and our other colleagues have started several pilot programs to introduce EVs to underserved communities and get young people excited about the career opportunities ahead. We'll be working with people like these talented young people here who are middle and high school students and teaching them how to do site surveys and outreach, and to place chargers in homes in their communities and in public places in their communities. We hope you will join us in mentoring and supporting these young people so that they can bring home to their communities the economic and environmental benefits of zero-emission and intelligent transportation. So now I would like to turn it over to Chris, who has brought the students here with us today, and you will get to hear and see a little bit about what they're doing. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Chris Petrosione. I'm over at Curtis Middle School in San Bernardino. I'm an educator there. I've been there for 13 years. I have a bunch of my students right over here, as well as students from our high schools in the area. And I have another high school student here, Manuel Carrillo, and I'll be introducing him in just a second where he can talk about his project. So over at Curtis Middle School, we do a lot of things with 7th and 8th grade students relating to STEM, engineering, and technology as a major focus. So they're doing things like 3D printing, robotics, coding, but they're taking an aspect of it that's solving not just community-based problems, but world problems. So they're aligning it to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and aligning it to things that they see within their community that needs to be solved. These kids are going to be the future. In California, we have passed a mandate, really, looking at removing fossil fuels and looking at other forms of sustainability within the transportation. And these are the kids that are going to be doing it. These are the kids that are going to be designing things for that. And these are going to be the kids that are going to be installing things throughout the state and throughout the nation and the world as we become a more connected and more energized and sustainable planet. And so I want to welcome up Manuel Carrillo, who's going to talk about his project. And so, Manny, can you tell us what you did here with your group?
So, hello everyone, my name is Manny Carrillo, and the truck, yes please. So, hello once again, my name is Manny Carrillo, or Manuel. I'm a high school mentor for Curtis Middle School. So for the past 6 years, I have been a part of the STEM program and the engineering program. And I've been thankfully given the opportunity for the last 4 years to actually mentor it and tutor it myself. So what I was once taught, I'm now able to reciprocate that knowledge and give it out to others. So the project I'm going to talk about with you today is one I'm thankful to say I've been a part of. Unfortunately, there was 2 kids who I was working with on this, and they were not able to make it today, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this all for us. So Brian and Israel, I apologize, but thank you. So their project was basically coming up with a way to utilize solar energy and power automobiles. And so they found the best angle that a solar panel can be aligned to, and it'll gather the most energy possible from that point of the sun. And so using this energy basically powers the engine or the motor of the engine or the battery of the semi-truck. And so this would help the drivers so that we can go away from the fuels and we would just be more on the purpose of ITS. And so in the future, we plan on actually alternating. So I don't know if you guys can see here, but it's set at an angle already and it doesn't really move from that. So it's set at about a 45-degree angle. In the future, since I don't know if you guys know, but truckers obviously go very long distances. So in the future, we want to change it so it can alternate itself. So it can turn 360 degrees and go in a full circle, depending on where the sun is, along with going up to 90 degrees. And so that's what we plan on doing in the future. This allows truckers to get the optimal amount of energy they can, depending on where they're going and where they're at. And so if you didn't know as well, truckers actually take very long breaks throughout their drives or their naps. Let's say it's too dark or they're just way too tired to go. This solar energy can be used to actually power their appliances and refrigeration inside of there. So since they leave the truck on, instead of wasting all that energy, we could use the energy gathered and put it to something useful. And so that's really it.
Yeah, so Manny's been working for 6 years with me. 2 years as part of our STEM program as a 7th and 8th grader. Then he came back and volunteered for the last 4 years. He's a graduating senior this year. And he's been assisting the students with their projects, giving them advice, giving them mentoring, and guiding them through it. He's working with them again as they go to change the angles and create some coded systems that will use photoreceptors to move those solar panels based off sun position and light intensity, and it's really phenomenal. When you were doing this project, Manny, what did you learn?
So there was a lot of different things I learned. Really, it was a lot of just teamwork. So as a group, it's really nice to have others by your side. I learned a lot of coding. I learned how to utilize the solar energy. I learned a lot about electrical engineering. And in addition to this, I learned how engineering can solve worldwide problems. So everyday life can really be changed by just doing something.
All right, and then obviously this does connect to transportation, but how can we connect it to utilizing smart transportation, specialized transportation that uses intelligence?
So I believe I said it earlier, so it has to do with utilizing sustainability. So we really want to move away from fossil fuels, and so it creates opportunities to use renewable energy in transportation of goods.
All right, and last question for you. What do you want to be when you grow up?
When I grow up, I actually want to take Mr. P's job, the guy next to me with the mic. I want to be a teacher. I want to teach. I really like the idea of engineering and that we're able to do something in life. And so I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I was told by the year of 2020, we were going to have flying cars. It's now 2022, and we can barely have self-driving cars. And so I want to be a part of this. I want to be the one to say, hey, I taught that kid. He came up with the first flying car, and so on and so on. And so I really just want to give more.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We are going to be here in the exhibit hall, and if you would entertain meeting with our students and talking to them about your career journey, what got you into this space. These students are all learning in STEM, so we have over 52 academies with San Bernardino City Unified School District, and so today we have representation from our Digital Media Academy, from Innovation at Aurora Valley High School, with our STEM engineering program at Indian Springs High School, and then of course our STEM lab over at Curtis Middle School. We firmly believe that the younger we can expose our youth in these sectors and the work that you do that is so critically important for today, but we need the workforce of tomorrow and then some, right, of the future. So we really appreciate you again for inviting us here to speak and to be a part of your conference and to get to explore your exhibit session so that we can continue to learn and take back all our learnings back into our communities, talk to our parents, talk to our loved ones. These will be this experience will be a family conversation around the dinner table, and this is radically transformational for our students. So thank you, Laura, for having us here today. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to meeting you during the remainder of the day. Thank you.